on stage as a moderator, please put your hands together for Mr. Rohit Ohri, Chairman and CEO, SCB Ulka. Welcome, sir, please. May we also have on stage Mr. Rathi Gangappa, CEO, Starcom India, and Mr. Dheeraj Sinha, CEO and Chief Strategy Officer, South Asia, Leo Burnett. With that, joining us in this conversation, before we move on, let's give them a huge round of applause, especially for our next session. With that, ladies and gentlemen, joining this conversation, we have someone who is truly an inspiring and empowering personality. She has been leading large-scale transformational programs on women's economic empowerment. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a huge round of applause for Suhela Khan, Country Program Manager, We Empower Asia, UN Women. Let me tell you, this panel here is here to throw light on diversity, equality, and inclusion. The stage is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you. So we are in the death hour between lunch and all these few good people who are left to listen to us. So very quickly, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And what we're hoping to have is a very stimulating discussion on DEI and what that has as an implication for organizations, and especially creative companies today. So to start off with, I thought the very interesting piece on this was the DEI representation on stage today. So 2 men, 2 women, seems like perfect, right? But what we were saying was that is just the starting point of this journey. And what we really are looking for is fundamental transformation, from an organizational structure perspective, as well as, culture and deep-rooted behavior that an organization has. So we need to really look at how we're going to change and affect that. So with that, we have, the only thing I can promise you, we're going to finish in 20 minutes, right? So my first question is really about, when you look at globally D&I initiatives, Asia Pacific is the most diverse and culturally rich, multilingual, region in the world. But DEI is really a challenge here. And not all companies, not all organizations have really embraced it. And what I'd like to ask you, Suhela, is tell us a bit about why do you think that that's happening? Why is the most diverse region the most challenged on DEI?
Yeah, I think it goes really back down to the structural constraints, Rohit. Also the harmful stereotypes that are prevalent in our society, gender stereotypes and gender biases. So we know that boys are still preferred over girls. We know that girls do face real challenges in access to equal opportunities, education, learning opportunities, etc. There is a data which says that, women globally spends 3.5 times more time on unpaid care work, which is taking care of families, which is taking care of elderly and child care. And India, this time is 10 times more. Imagine what it does to them, what it does to their participation in the workforce, what it does to their participation in economic, social, and political activities, even in leisure. So, and that is reflected in the workforce participation in India. Today, the labor force, women labor force participation is between 19 to 20%. And it is declining continuously over last few decades. So I think it is really about addressing those cultural norms, the harmful cultural norms. Yeah.
Yeah, great. That's a great point. I think, really looking at, in large parts of this region, it is really about tradition and traditional behavior and a lot of not breaking the stereotypes. Now, moving from macro to a bit micro, when you look at organizations, what is the big challenge that we have here? And one of the big, buzzwords right now is really about DEI washing. It's a tokenism that many organizations do in this, is hire DEI, of chief officer who looks at this. So it's really about just building awareness versus making structural changes in organizations. And what I'd like, Rathi, you to talk about is really from an organization perspective, what changes do you think fundamentally companies need to make to actually bring about, this, you've talked about this in our earlier discussion, really about what's the big impact that organizations see when they have women in positions of authority?
Well, I think I want to start by saying, look at AAA Sophia itself, right? I mean, after a gap of 35 years, you have Anupriya Acharya as the first woman on board. That I think could be the proof in the pudding in terms of how the whole Goa Fest event has been organized, right? And the amount of experiences that we've witnessed here today. Anyway, jokes apart, that's a very serious one. I think it's first about wanting to make that change, right? Wanting to say that as an organization, I want to see more and more women, in the leadership position. I think that to me is the first fundamental requirement. And the other call out that I want to make is it's not just about a script or a narrative about saying I want women up front, right? It's also about recognizing merit and competency, right? We are all here as women leaders, and I see quite a few of them in the last 3 days that I've met, and I'm really so proud of seeing so many women leaders, right? It's just not about, just, tick mark or, just saying that I need more women up there, but it's also about saying that, women coming there on their own, on their merit, on their competency, right? And recognizing that. And I think organizations should start doing that. That to me is very, very important. The third thing is that I'm seeing that change happen. Our organization itself is, fairly, in the leadership level, we have quite a few women in our organization, and I see the way we work, the way we embrace diversity, the way we embrace inclusivity, right? I think it's definitely a thing of the past, at least for us, and we're seeing a lot of change even with the way businesses are growing, the way our company itself is progressing, right? That's from a personal experience. Yeah.
Great. Now, narrowing it down even further to the business that we are in, the communication business, and really talking about, what is it that DEI really needs to look at from a communication perspective? Is it just about BIPOC, which is a new thing that I just picked up a couple of, weeks back, is really about showing Black, Indigenous, or people of color. That's really in tokenism in advertising. But what is it that is required, and how do we as advertising professionals push society, push the agenda of DEI forward? That's a big question. And what I'd like to do is to get Dheeraj's point of view on this.
Yeah. So I think there are two aspects to this. One is how work gets done and what kind of work goes out, right? And I would say, going back to the point that we need to change the culture archetypes, the heroes, right? I think nothing has done more damage to our industry on this aspect than the idea of madmen, right? The whole idea that men can have their way in this business, right, is the most terrible thing to happen, and I hope it never comes back, those days, right? And other small little things, right? You got to build a culture of comfort, right? Our ideas being discussed over a smoke break that you're not part of, right? Our ideas happening after 9 p.m. over a bottle of whiskey in the agency, and you're not invited to those, right? How are being invited? How are you building a culture of comfort? Some time back, I do the skip level conversations, and I was talking to a young creative girl in our agency, and she said, Dheeraj, once I have a child, right? How am I going to come back to work, right? And our business has been notorious in the way that we've lost really, really great women talent once they, started a family and so on, because they said, 18 hours of work, we can't do it, right? So at a ground level, how do you build a culture where women feel comfortable, not just at a policy level, but they feel engaged, they feel loved, they feel welcomed, right? The other day, for example, we've just moved into a new office and we're saying, can we put sanitary napkin machines in women's bathroom? Just a very small little thing, but I mean, these are symbols to say that we want to build an equitable place. That's one. The second is the power of comms that we have as an industry in being able to influence society, culture, and so on and so forth. And I'll talk about the latest work we've done for Whisper, right, where we are bringing back the missing chapter on menstruation, right, because not being taught in India, right, and we've lobbied, we've run a campaign to bring that chapter back. Now, that's the power communications has, right? You can bring indelible imprint on culture and how 23 million girls will learn and not walk out of schools because of something as basic as menstruation, right? A part of this also, I feel, is co-opting men, right? I mean, the worst scenario is that you have the other 50% becoming a passive-aggressive part of the equation. We have to co-opt them. I mean, at home, we are bringing about 2 boys, right? And we are working really hard to make sure that they understand the sentiment. Right, so I would say those are the on-ground fixes that this needs.
Yeah, great. So Suhela, now you're the expert on this, and really from an Unstereotype Alliance perspective, I'd like you to share with the audience here what are the tools that are available. You know, because otherwise it becomes a bit of an academic discussion, right? What can we use to actually actively, you know, look at DEI as an initiative, move on that?
Yeah, thank you, Rohit. And I would like to reflect a little bit on why are we even talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is DE&I, which Rohit is referring to. You know, there are 2 major arguments. Actually, there are 3 arguments, but I would reflect on 2. One is really the human rights argument. If you would look at the 50% of the population of our country, which represent women and people from diverse categories, it's so unfair that they do not have access to similar opportunities and resources. What it does in turn is that it impacts you know, the productivity, it impacts growth. And here comes the business case and business argument that if you have more diverse and diverse workforce and equitable policies and practices, it impacts your growth, it impacts productivity, it drives innovation, and it leads to more customer acquisition. And this is the statistics that is out there. Now, how can we make our businesses more gender responsive? And that is what there are certain tools that UN Women has developed along with other UN organizations, but through a lot of consultative processes with industry bodies, with academia, etc. One is around Unstereotype Alliance, which is really an alliance, a global alliance of brands and members to look at the power of advertising and media in creating progressive portrayal of men, women, and people from all the diversities. And why this is important? Because we know that advertising has the capability to change, bring the change that we are all aspiring for. That is one. And the second aspect, so there is something which is called 3Ps framework that every practitioner sitting here can adopt, which is really talking about the presence, who all is present in as a character. You know, if we look at certain ads, we find that there are certain kind of people who are completely not represented. And look what damage it can do to see them not at all present in the popular culture. That is one. The other dimension is perspective. Whose perspective are we talking about? And the third is personality. When we are portraying the character, how truly real personalities are being depicted. So this is the framework that is available for every practitioner if you are trying to develop your communication products. But the larger point that I'm trying to also emphasize on something, which is how do we make our businesses more gender responsive? Which means that how do we make sure that there is diversity, equity, and inclusion? And for that, Rohit, there is something called Women's Empowerment Principles, which every company can adopt. These are a set of 7 principles which help companies to look at their policies and practices at the workplace, marketplace, and communities from a gender lens, and create opportunities for women and girls and diverse population in the businesses. Yeah, I'll stop here.
Thanks. I think the important piece here is the access to the tools, right?
Exactly.
That we have free of cost, and you know, everybody can go there and really get a handle on the steps to do it. Otherwise, you know, we have a big academic discussion around this. The other interesting piece that I wanted to talk about, we have a minute and a half to go, was really about that has, you know, COVID-19 been the chief DEI officer for many organizations. So Rathi, what would you say? Because this new aspect of flexibility and work from home has empowered a lot of women to stay in the workforce. Building on what Dheeraj was talking about, like we find a lot of women falling off. What has been your experience in your organization?
I would say that COVID has affected everybody. I mean, it's not just about women alone, right? Of course, probably the stresses and the pressures would be different from a woman working and managing her house at the same time. No denying that at all. But I would definitely think it's kind of equally, you know, put pressure on both men and women and across all the workforce, right? But I do see that, yes, it has given women the empowerment to, you know, at least I think we've had 2 years to settle into that whole new normal and figure out how do we manage both our home and our work. And I think it has, to a certain extent, helped create a very acceptable hybrid model where more and more women could also be coming in, you know, into the workforce and saying that, yes, this is now possible for me to manage my home and my work as well. So I think there are both positives and negatives to it, and we're seeing some of us settling into the new roles, the new rules that, you know, the pandemic has set for us. And yes, to a certain extent that, you know, we're seeing in more women coming in as well to work and, you know, coming into the workforce. Yeah.
Yeah. So flexibility is really, really
I think so
the key
too.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to end with you, Dheeraj, and to talk a bit about, you know, co-opting men, right? Because this is then becomes a men versus women. What's your perspective on that?
So I think, Rohit, what's happening well now is that this is top of agenda for everybody, right? I've been in client pitches where clients have said, we want to work with you because there's so many women on your team, right? Starting there, right? Where you realize that this is part of the growth system. It's not just something you do at a policy level. And therefore, it's important that, you know, the sensitization is across the board. I mean, for leaders to realize that, you know, if you're losing out on 50% of your talent base, that's not good growth strategy. That's terrible growth strategy, right? And you do whatever you can to keep these people in the fray. And therefore, and since a lot of leaders are men, right, it's important for them to appreciate the power that's bringing on the table. The whisper idea I spoke to you about is carried by the entire women's team, right? You know, and you look at them and say, wow, I mean, amazing people, amazing thinking, right? So once you begin to appreciate that, then you don't need a policy to push it down.
Correct.
Just
Absolutely.
like to add to what Dheeraj said, right? I mean, and going back to the earlier question, I mean, if you look at where we come from at Starcom, we have 50% women at the leadership level. And that's been the change that has happened over the last 2 years, right? I mean, to me, that's testament of the fact that there is a women workforce who are capable and with merit and who've been selected because there is a need of the hour and they fit that role really very well. And all happened in the last 2 years or so. Right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a wonderful time that we're all in, and for us, and I see the changes happening, and I mean, yeah.
Great. So, you know, what I wanted to end with is actually bring it all back to what is the theme of Goafest this year, is unlocking the superpower within. And I think this is, you know, when you really recognize and create structures around diversity and inclusion, that's when you unlock an organization's superpower within in many ways and truly drive growth. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give that panel a huge, huge round of applause. Well, of course, there should be no signs of any kind of, you know, where you're talking about diversity and inclusion. I think the best way to go forward is to actually diminish things that sort of create that diversity. So I'm just going to take names now. Well, a big, big thank you to Rohit Ohri, a big thank you to, of course, Rathi, a big thank you to Dheeraj Sinha, and a big thank you to Suhela Khan. Thank you so much, the panel there.